22 seconds of film footage form the basis of a late show special here on BBC Two now. They were shot exactly 30 years ago and have since been bought, sold, stolen and subpoenaed. The man behind the camera was Abraham Zapruder.
The Zapruder film is a home movie that was taken from the position where a Hollywood film crew would have set up if they had known the assassination would occur.
There are over 500 photographs, I think, that have been collected of the events in Dealey Plaza that day. One man, Abraham Zapruder, got it from beginning to end.
The Zapruder film has become the ultimate fetish of the Kennedy assassination. This icon, whose meaning is unclear. Maybe it has 100 million meanings, maybe it has no meaning at all. We just know one thing about it. It was taken by a man shooting a Super 8 camera that day.
Would you state your full name for the record, please?
Abraham Zapruder.
What is your home address?
3909 Marquette.
Here in Dallas?
In Dallas, yes.
Are you in business here in Dallas, Mr. Zapruder?
Yes.
What business are you in?
Manufacturing ladies' dresses.
Mr. Zapruder came to Dallas back in the 40s from New York City. Our business was called Jennifer Juniors. It was located in downtown Dallas at 501 Elm Street. It was a nice size operation, and like I said, we enjoyed a good living out of it. He lives in Dallas, in University Park. It was a nice home, and it was not ostentatious by any means. It was a nice, comfortable home, and he took care of his yard. He was very, very family-oriented. He was, in fact, when he went to take the pictures, the reason was to have pictures of the president for his grandchildren.
Just what makes
on that day, there was a little excitement about the president coming to Dallas. The fact that he was coming right down the street, on the corner, so to speak, made it a little more interesting. All the people were planning to be outside at lunchtime so they could watch it or watch from the fire escape. But Abe forgot his camera, and he had to go home. And I told him, I don't know why you're doing that. When that motorcade comes by this corner, they're going to be going 100 miles an hour. You won't get much of a picture. But he went home anyway. And, as they say, the rest is history.
In fact, I didn't have my camera. And my secretary asked me why I don't have it, and I told her I wouldn't have a chance to see the president. And somehow she urged me, and I went home and got my camera and came back. At first I thought I would take the pictures from the window, because my building is right next to the building where the alleged assassin was. But I figured I might as well get better pictures, so I walked down Elm Street on down to the lower part, closer to the underpass. I tried one place, and it was on a narrow ledge. I couldn't balance myself very well. And I tried another place, and it had some obstruction of signs. And finally, I found a place farther down near the underpass that was a square of concrete. I don't know what you call it, about 4 feet high.
The motorcade came down Houston Street and turned left on Elm Street, did it not?
That's right.
And it proceeded then down Elm Street toward the Triple Underpass, is that correct?
That's correct. I started shooting when the motorcade started coming in.
Tell us what happened as you took those pictures.
Well, as the car came in line, I was shooting through a telephoto lens, and as it reached about here, I heard the first shot, and I saw the president lean over and grab himself like this.
Grab himself on the front of his chest.
For a moment, I thought it was, like you say, oh, he got me when you hear a shot. I don't think the president's going to make jokes like this. But before I had a chance to organize my mind, I heard the second shot, and I saw that his head opened up, and the blood and everything came out, and I started... I can hardly talk about it.
The fateful slide of the limousine down Elm Street. You see Kennedy's arms go up, Connolly turns, and you know what's going to happen. You know that explosion is going to follow. I think some of those images have now been embedded in the general psyche so that any sort of appreciation of this event really centers on that brutality, on the murder that's at the heart of things.
There's something about the human experience that's recorded in that makes it something that sets the standard by which we judge all the recorded events in film. It's kind of like the gauge of brutality.
We are there. We are there at the assassination of President Kennedy. There's some kind of direct connection with that event. We're seeing it happen in front of our eyes. And the power of that, the power of film to capture an event in the real world, is not like anything else.
To say beautiful would sound very strange for such ugly and terrifying footage in terms of what it records, except if you think in terms like the classic elegy. I mean, this is an elegy which describes the death of this man. And it is an emotional response to him right before and right after his death. And as I read that footage, because it is the response of a human being, it's a series of chords, of slurs of movement that are his body witness to this, and in as open a mode as you could invent for motion pictures in our time.
Zapruder, as a cameraman, unfortunately left a lot to be desired. He had vertigo. He was very dizzy. His secretary, Marilyn Sitzman, was helping hold him up. She had her hands around him, keeping him from tipping over. Twice during the shooting of the film, he nearly lost the president, first on the left border and then on the bottom border just prior to the headshot. When he heard shots, when he responded to sounds of shots, he would jump, as virtually anybody else would, and it put a jiggle or an out-of-focus segment at the point where each shot happened.
I was teaching cinematography at NYU back in the early 70s with Marty Scorsese and a bunch of other people there. And the name Zapruder became a kind of a way of describing a certain phenomenon, which would be that if you had a very, very high quotient of total amateurism in your technique, but the content were just superb. If what you were filming was absolutely riveting and captivating and couldn't be topped, why that was like 100% on the Zapruder curve.
He's photographing this event with an openness that's priceless. I mean, he's just out there like any other human being, with a very small camera in hand that's pressed up against his face, and the power of it is kin to the power we expect from art.
I don't even know how I did it. And I don't even remember getting off the abutment, but there I was, I guess. And I started walking back toward my office, screaming, "They killed him, they killed him." And the people I met on the way were yelling, "What happened, what happened?" And I kept on yelling, "They killed him." Finally, I got back to my office. My secretary, I told her to call the police or the Secret Service. And that was about all.
The chief of the Secret Service came up to the floor, and he was with a Dallas Morning News reporter named Harry McCormick, and he asked us, he asked Mr. Zapruder, did he think he had got it all on the film? And Mr. Zapruder said yes, and he said, "I'd like to get them developed." Well, at that point, Mr. McCormick said, "Well, I think Channel 8 can do it." And we went outside, and the two policemen, we went in their car, and they had to turn the siren on to get us through the crowd that had gathered there. And of course, we knew everybody in the neighborhood, and I guess they must have thought something was funny. I looked at Abe and I said, "They probably think we did it."
A gentleman just walked in our studio that I am meeting for the first time, as well as you. This is WFAA-TV in Dallas, Texas. May I have your name, please, sir?
My name is Abraham Zapruder.
Mr. Zapruder?
Zapruder.
While we were standing there, by the way, they asked Abe Zapruder to come on television, which he did an interview on camera.
He was about halfway down there. I had a shot, and he slumped to the side like this. Then I had another shot or two. I couldn't say it was one or two. And I saw his head practically open up, all blood and everything, and I kept on shooting. That's about all. I'm just sick.
I think that pretty well expresses the entire feelings of the whole world. You have the film in your camera.
Yes, I brought it on the studio.
We'll try to get that processed and have it as soon as possible. Right now, we have videotape.
The people at Channel 8 explained that they could not develop it and that we had to take it to Kodak. They took us in the police car and we went to Kodak, to the lab, and they were set up to take that film right in there, and we watched through the glass as they processed the film. When the film was processed, they took us into a screening room and they showed us that piece of film. It's only, I believe, 22 seconds long. And it was a devastating piece of film. Everybody sat there in stunned silence.
We were setting up an office in a hotel in downtown Dallas, and I got a phone call. This would have been about 5 or 6, maybe an hour after we arrived, from one of our stringers, part-time correspondent, who was in police headquarters. She said she had heard from a cop that a local businessman named Abraham Zapruder had photographed the entire assassination on his home movie camera, and she thought I ought to have that information. I said, boy, should I.
The expectation of the readership of Life, which was really the cross-section of America, would be that they would have the definitive story, and the pictures and all of the action that had happened. It was seen as the national diary. It was seen as the pages that would one day become history.
For the next 5 hours, I called every 15 minutes. And finally, at 11 o'clock, I called and this weary voice answered. And I said, is this Abraham Zapruder? Yes. I said, I've been told that you photographed the assassination of the president from this afternoon. Is that correct? Yes. He was answering literally in monosyllables. I said, did you get it from beginning to end? Yes. I said, have you had the film processed? Yes. I said, do you have the film with you? Yes. I said, can I come out and see it now? No. He had been driving around for 2 or 3 hours, been to his country home. He was so upset by what he had first witnessed and then seen on film. He was exhausted and disheartened, and he didn't want me there. And I think in this business, you know when to press and when not to press. And I said, may I see it in the morning? He said, yes, come to my office at 9. So I got there at 8. As I arrived, so did a car full of Secret Service agents. So he took us into a little room where he had hung a sheet on the wall and this creaky old projector. And he put the film in the projector and said, turn off the lights. And I suddenly realized that I was going to see this film, and more importantly, I was going to see it with Dallas Secret Service agents who were about to view the catastrophic non-execution of their most important duty, which is to protect the president. And I thought, these poor guys. I've never seen it since then without wincing, knowing that frame 313 was coming up, but of course we knew nothing about what to expect then. Suddenly the top of the president's head simply disappears in a great spray of blood and brain matter, and there wasn't a person in that room that didn't go, ah. I mean, it was literally as if you'd just been slugged in the stomach. To myself, I said, well, my God, Life magazine has got to have this film.
When I came to work about 9, there was already a huge crowd in our offices. People yelling and screaming, I'll give you $150,000 for that. And I remember the number vividly because there was a man sitting at my desk in my office telling me that to get out of there while he was using the phone, that I was ruining a $150,000 deal. And I told him to get out of my chair and get out of my office and go use the phone somewhere else. And I walked into where Abe Zapruder was, and he was with the fellow, I believe his name was Richard Stolley, from Time Life.
I said, Mrs. Zapruder, that's a very powerful piece of film you have out there, and Life magazine would like to have it, and for unusual pieces of film like this, we sometimes will pay more than our usual space rates for it. And I said, for that film, we might even go up to $15,000. And he just looked at me and smiled.
Mr. Stolley was very gentlemanly, quiet. He was obviously shaken by the event, and he showed some compassion. The fellows outside were screaming and trying to get to Zapruder.
He was a businessman, but not a hugely successful one, and he realized that financial security of his family could be enhanced by this film. The second priority, and one that I honestly believe was as important to him, is that it not be exploited. He described to me a nightmare that he'd had the previous night, only a few hours after taking this film, that he was in Times Square, walking through Times Square, and he suddenly looked up, and there was a movie marquee with "See the President Get Shot." I finally got to $50,000, and I said, Mrs. Zapruder, in all candor, this is as far as I can go, and I urge you to accept this with our promises that we will take the kind of care with this film that you would if you were in charge of the magazine. We had a handshake, and I said, I got a piece of paper from him, and I typed out a crude contract between Life magazine and me and Abraham Zapruder. We both signed it. I took 2 reels. I took the original and I took 1 copy. I said, is there a back door to this place? Because I don't want to go out through that crowd. And he took me to a back door. I went down into an alley, and he went out to face this very angry group of journalists.
He wasn't trying to get rich. People have said to me, well, that's not what I'd have done. And, well, you don't know what you'd have done, and it didn't happen to you. So it happened to him.
The editors and the publisher of Life finally got a chance to view the film on Sunday, and that is when the decision was made in New York that we should try to obtain all rights, not just print rights. So on Monday, I think Monday around noon, while the president was being buried and while all of America was watching television, I went to see Zapruder, this time in his lawyer's office. And we negotiated very quickly, without incident or argument or whatever, to $150,000, payable in $25,000 annual installments for all rights.
To consider the Kennedy assassination as foremost a homicide, and the Zapruder film as its most crucial piece of material evidence. And you have to keep in mind that within 48 hours after the shooting of the film and the shooting of the president, a private media entity had gotten physical control of it.
C.D. Jackson was the publisher of Life, and He was a very emotional man, and I think as far as CD was concerned, I think his main instinct was perhaps not competitive, but he wanted to spare, at least at that moment, the American public the horror of seeing this film.
The film itself was not seen for about a decade, and what we're seeing were a series of stills that were published in Life magazine in several different versions. So you have a rather extraordinary transformation of a very brief filmic narrative, 22 seconds, broken down into a series of stills, which become sort of iconographic emblems in their own right. What you don't see are the images of Kennedy's head actually being shot off. And what's interesting about the suppression of these actual murder shots is that instead of this being a sort of brutal slaying, it became a kind of elegiac exercise.
Life was the magazine that the American people looked up to for not only news, but tasteful presentation, and it's the reason we left out frame 313. It was clear the president, we have him slumped in the back of the car. It's clear that he's dead. We don't have to see his brains splattering all over the air. And the feeling was that the same, an extension of that feeling, had to do with the film, that it was bad enough to see it in still pictures. Let's don't show it in film.
Limited access to information always begets charges of conspiracy and intrigue. They may have thought at the time, best case scenario, that they were doing something on behalf of America, but by the same token, they created a context for doubt that haunts us today.
Film really has fueled the conspiracy industry for the past 3 decades in America, in some ways single-handedly. Since the film was purchased by Time Life originally from Abraham Zapruder, and they only published stills of it, the American public didn't see it en masse until the mid-1970s almost. So it gave the impression that there was something wonderful that had to be hidden in the film.
In the summer of 1966, the Zapruder film had been published, certain frames, in Life magazine. The film also was published sequentially, except for a few minor glitches, in one volume of the exhibits and hearings of the Warren Commission. Those reproductions were absolutely miserable. It was extremely difficult to see anything. Those 2 published versions were the only versions available to the public at large. If, in the summer of 1966, you showed that you were a, quote, valid researcher, you could go to the National Archives and persuade Marion Johnson, the archivist, who was in charge of the Kennedy papers, to take you to a small viewing room and there project the copy of the Zapruder film that had actually been used by the Warren Commission.
So a handful of people went to the archives and had the psychologically horrifying experience of looking at this film and seeing President Kennedy being thrown to the rear by a bullet which supposedly, according to the United States government, came from behind. And they saw this about 10, 15 blocks from the White House and wrote about it to their fellows researchers in letters and memos, and we were all horrified.
What was enormously frustrating was that one could see in the film that the Warren Commission used that it was very fuzzy. One heard rumors that a much clearer copy existed in the vaults of Time Incorporated. And from time to time, one would hear rumors and stories of people who had seen Life's copy, and it was much clearer. So we were all tantalized by the possibility of this absolutely extraordinary evidence existing here in New York in a form that none of us could see.
Life has been accused of censoring or sitting on this film, and the fact is that any responsible agency, police agency, law enforcement, judicial, whatever, who asked for a copy of the film, we gave, with the admonition that that it should not be shown to anyone else. But and we finally were deceived in this respect.
Of course, there were other guns there. Of course, the fatal shots were fired from the front. There's no question about that, and there's no question about the fact that it can be proved.
Garrison at that point was such a loose cannon by the time the Clayshaw trial occurred that we would not give up the film except by subpoena, which, being the district attorney, needless to say, he supplied promptly. And it is the firm belief of most of us that during that period, copies, illegal copies, were made, and the bootlegging business began.
I went to Hollywood Valley Film Labs out in the San Fernando Valley, and I walked in and I said, "I'd like 100 copies of this, please." It was an 8mm film, and I wanted 100 contact prints. So the guy disappeared into an office, and I guess they were projecting it in there, and the owner of the lab said, "Will you come in here for a minute?" And I said, "Uh-oh, I'm going to really be in trouble now." And he says, he has it up there on the screen, and he said, "Do you think Jackie's going out in the trunk because she's trying to run away, or do you think she's trying to, something else is going on, you know?"
I became aware of bootleg copies of the Zapruder footage floating around, very poor quality ones. And of course, we were all fascinated to see it, you know, and some of us, you know, smoke dope or do whatever and get morose watching it. Many, I think, people who were politically left, we took it very worshipfully. On the other hand, I also heard of less respectful uses of it, intercut with pornographic footage, you know, and whatever.
Bootleg copies were made and distributed through the country, through the underground, but they were very muddy. They were virtually worthless. The only thing you could really see is that when the president is struck in the head, he's thrown to the rear. That's about all you could see. When I started working in the motion picture industry in 1969, I met a most remarkable man in New York who had done some work for Time Incorporated on the Zapruder film, just blown it up to 35mm, and was allowed to keep a what they call a mechanic's copy of the film. Well, he did not have any particular interest in trying to resolve the case himself, but he knew of my interest in the case, and he allowed me to view the film and eventually gave it to me. After he had shown me the film, he allowed me to make optically enhanced copies. I devised some techniques which I used on the Zapruder film and created versions of the film which were actually more important and better evidence than the original film was in its raw state. Once I was able to show it on national television, thanks to Geraldo Rivera, overnight the case was reborn.
Good night, America, a second-generation TV news magazine. Tonight we devote our entire show to a discussion of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
When I saw the Zapruder film, when it was shown to me in my studio, it was as if the ancient history became current events. It was a piece of evidence that was so glaring and so crying to be shown to the American people that I decided to risk the lawsuit and go ahead and broadcast it.
I'm telling you right straight out that if you are at all sensitive, if you're at all queasy, then don't watch this film. Just put on the late night movie because this is very heavy. It's the film shot by the Dallas dress manufacturer Abraham Zapruder, and it's the execution of President Kennedy.
Now, before he goes behind the sign, the president is waving to the crowd. When he comes out from behind the sign, he is shot, then Governor Connolly is shot.
He's already been hit.
He's already been hit. Jackie doesn't realize what's happened yet. She goes to his aid.
And now, that's the shot that blew off his head. It's the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in the movie.
I remember very clearly getting a hostile letter from Time Life stating, in fact, that we had violated the copyright and that Time Life was in no way responsible, and they reserved all their legal remedies to come after us for whatever damages they felt were necessary. I remember also getting calls from the Zapruder family saying, "How dare you," essentially. And my position was consistent throughout. It was, sue me. You know, to take the line from the famous musical Guys and Dolls, sue me, shoot bullets through me. I was willing to take the heat because I felt that in any civil litigation, the true story of why that footage had not been broadcast earlier would be uncovered, much to the chagrin and embarrassment of Time Life or whoever else was responsible for, in my view, suppressing it.
We decided at that point that rather than Zapruder himself was dead, his son was a tax lawyer in Washington, and we decided that it would be far more sensible for us to retain print rights, not television and movie rights, foolishly, retain print rights in perpetuity, but otherwise turn the film back to the Zapruder family for whatever use they wanted to make of it, which we did in 1976 for $1.
I think the family is responsible in this sense, that they are freely licensing it. If the family was saying today, we only are going to provide it to people who say that Oswald acted alone, or we're only going to provide it to people who say it was a CIA conspiracy or KGB, and we have our own theory about this, that would be quite offensive. Or we're not going to provide it to Oliver Stone because we don't like the idea of JFK. Instead, what they said is we're equal opportunity providers. If you have the money, you can have the film.
I'm glad the family, the Zapruder family, is permitting the film to come out on CD-ROM, because I think that's going to be the ultimate democratization of all this data. Everybody can take this film on their PC and look at it, frame by frame, and then anybody can see what's happening in the car or with Connolly or Kennedy, and they can argue about it. And I think that's the way it should be.
Perhaps the Zapruder film gives us this feeling of hope, that somewhere in that film lies the answer of what happened to President Kennedy and what happened to America. I would call it false hope. This idea that somehow you can read reality off of a film emulsion, like you can simply look at a map and find your way from one city to another, is just quite simply false. Film is a lie. Film is not a record of absolute truth. It's just another artifact that has, yes, a causal relationship with the real world, but what that exact relationship is often obscure.
I want to tell you, you may not be aware of it yourself, but I want to tell you that your film has been one of the most helpful things to the work of the Commission that we could have possibly have had, because it enables us to study the various positions of the people in the car and to develop with a fair degree of accuracy the facts here.
I understand. I'm willing to be helpful, but I'm sorry it had to be on an occasion like this.
Yes, that's right.
I'm only sorry I broke down. I didn't know I was going to do it.
Mr. Zapruder, I want to thank you very much for the Commission for coming down. It's been very helpful.
I feel ashamed of myself, but it was a tragic thing. And when you started asking me about that, I saw the whole thing all over again. It was an awful thing, and I loved the president. And to see that happen before my eyes, his head opened up and shot down like a dog, it leaves a very, very deep, sentimental impression with you. It's terrible.
I think what that film tells us is the randomness of life, of violence. My feeling is one crazed, angry, lonely conspirator shot from that building and killed a very popular president, and with it, a lot of the dreams of this country and, Lord knows, the innocence that remained in America.
I look at it in a far more pragmatic way than I did back in the middle 70s when I first broadcast that footage to the country. Now I think it's one of melancholy and frustration rather than anger. It's one of a kind of wistfulness rather than passion, because I feel that the true story will never be told.
It's often seemed to me that the Kennedy assassination has makes a kind of analogy to Hamlet, that the king is dead, the king is murdered, and there's a mystery surrounding the murder. Yet no Fortinbras has arrived. And the society somehow cannot cleanse itself until something like that happens. And it seems to me that the showing of that brutal film again and again reminds us that we're not clean yet, that there's still something rotten in the state of Denmark, that we still await some conclusion that might free us, you know, from that limousine and that explosion and that sunny day in Dallas.